So good afternoon, handy listeners and handy viewers, such as you are, and welcome to this, a very nice little intimate chat with Steamforge's esteemed development team on the changes brought to you today on both the Morticians and Ratcatchers guilds. And I am joined, as I have been before, by friend of the channel, Mr. Jamie Perkins.
Hello, Rich. How's it going?
Hello. Very well, thank you, chap. And I'm also joined by a man who designs rules in Guild Ball specifically to beat me at tournaments on technicalities, Mr. Steve Margetson.
Hey there.
Not bitter, still not bitter. So, gentlemen, we've seen quite a lot of changes, and by this time, both viewers and listeners, handies such as they are, I have no idea where that catchphrase came from, have seen cards across on Panzer's blog. They've heard Connor and Panzer and I wax lyrical about all of the changes and where we think they fit into their respective guilds by this point. So I'm not going to go through each card in general. Rather, what I'd like to do, gents, is to sort of focus on your decision making, both in terms of the guilds themselves, their ethos, where you see them fitting within Guild Ball as a whole. I'm loath to use the term meta, but I suppose that is actually quite appropriate in this case. And sort of what led you to make the changes that you did, and also then I have a whole bunch of questions, as you might imagine. So if that's all right by you, gents, where to start? Should we go with the Morticians as the larger one?
It's probably a good idea.
Yeah. Get that one out of the way.
The big picture stuff.
Exactly. First of all, I absolutely adore the changes to Obulus. I'm a huge fan of that because it's nothing whatsoever. There was lots of discussion in my local meta, in the sort of the London Guild Ball community WhatsApp group, of all the changes that were going to happen to Obulus, and I'm delighted to see none of their ideas in effect. So why is he perfect? Steve, I'll come to you first. Why was sort of, because I'm sure there was a point where you looked at this and went, how do we change him? How do we make him better? How do we make him more? But what was it that meant that nothing needed to be done? Because in many ways, that's quite a bold decision.
I mean, I guess the first thing is almost just working as intended, for lack of a better term. It's a case of the Morticians are all about control, and the other sort of the themes are they're a control team that focus on fighting and manipulating the battlefield, and then sort of a sub theme within them is that they're fragile, and Obulus pretty much fits everything there. And I think very early on we decided we weren't really going to change too much about him, and in this case it ended up being nothing, because he just does everything really that we want him to do. He has the control element in Puppet Master, and to a lesser extent as well, Misdirection. He's got the squishy Mortician stat line. He's got, 4-1 with less boxes than your average captain, so he fits in that particular area. So he pretty much feels like the Mortician archetype that a lot of the guild is kind of based around.
Oh, you've kind of nicely reminded me there of something that I wanted to talk about and said that I wanted to talk about and then completely skipped over in my excitement to talk about Obulus. In that, you said in all of the blogs leading up to this point that, you've really sort of dug down into what it is to be that guild, to look at that guild's core identity. Now, you've mentioned there that control, that takeout orientated, that perhaps the fragility that, I think it was singled out last season, you mentioned, Jamie, that they have on average the lowest health points. So it's interesting to see, like, across the board, those health points pretty much stay where they were. Is that a conscious decision on your parts, gents?
Yeah, I think that's pretty conscious. It's a case of that the guild is fragile, and most of the models represent that. You have kind of a few exceptions. Casket is more hardy than your average your average Morticians player, and Ghast as well. I mean, his is more based in his defensive tech of having fear and rising anger, but yeah, we're pretty happy with them. And the reason they didn't change was that the fragile elements of them was pretty much working as we expected they would and how we wanted them to.
So,
and just to drill down, just to drill down into that a little bit deeper, it's when you're creating a control playstyle or a playstyle that is entirely based upon control, when the win conditions of the game, the win conditions of Guild Ball are nothing really to do with control. Control itself doesn't score you victory points, doesn't get you goals, doesn't get you takeouts. You have to use control to manipulate getting one or both of those victory conditions. And in balancing control, we have to balance so many extra factors that are not immediately obvious. And the fact that when you're asking a team to literally take control of the game, take control of the flow of the game, how fast it happens, you are in many ways, when you're playing the Morticians properly, when your opponent scores points when you allow them to, when you're like, I could stop that, but I'm not going to, because ultimately I want to do this in order to win the game. And making the Mortician player or making a control team have to make those choices. You never want a game where your control team is going, I don't have to let them have any points at all, because that's no fun for the opponent. They don't get to do anything at all. At the same time, the control team or the control player has to feel like they are controlling the game. And you never want to have them making a choice where it's, I can stop you scoring every single point here, and that's fairly easy to do. That's no fun for anybody. It's not even really that fun for the control player eventually. No. But what you do, the choices you do want them making are saying, I might have to let you get 2 points here so that I can score 4 to 6 points here. And that is a way more interesting choice for them to make. And it's also a gamble, because that 2 points they're allowing the opponent to make might actually turn into 4 to 6 points on its own. And that's where the struggle comes into it. And part of achieving that level of balance is making the control team be very fragile. They have to make every single choice very consciously and very deliberately, because if they get it wrong, then they're going to lose a lot of players very easily. If you have an extremely resilient control team, that can be a lot less fun to play into, because not only are you having some of your choices dictated for you, but when you actually get to make decisions and when you actually get to attack the control team, then they're really hard to bring down as well. That's just not fair. So it has to be that when the control player makes a mistake, they have to feel it. And or if you look at it the other way as well, if you're saying to an opposing team, say the Butchers, that okay, of the potential 12 attacks you could make this turn, you're only going to get to make 4. Those 4 attacks have to matter when they actually get through. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it, and a lot of it's quite difficult to assess, and a lot of it's quite indirect. But there are a lot of different factors that play into balancing the power of a control team and how fun it is to play into a control team.
I mean, this is really interesting, because essentially the question I wanted to end this podcast on was, how do you design a control team that doesn't make it an MPE for your opponent? So what you've very nicely done there, Jamie, is you've answered my last question first without me asking it. So yeah, that's brilliant. Efficiency, I like it. So with all that in mind, were Morticians in Season 3 what you wanted Morticians in Season 3 to be? I mean, you famously, what is at time of recording last weekend, Jamie, won a Morticians game at the WTC with a tap in from Dirge, stood up from the table and screamed, "Morticians are bad." So, you're clearly aware of the reputation that they are not the best in terms of when people create tier lists, and I'm guilty of doing such things myself. So where did you see them fitting in Season 3? Were you happy with that? How has that influenced your decisions for Season 4?
I'm going to take this one, Steve. Sorry. I know that it was like you're supposed to Mortician questions, but this is definitely a me one. So, Morticians, so I'm in a bit of a difficult position with Morticians a lot of the time, because I like being a game developer, a lead developer of any game. You have to be as objective as humanly possible and unbiased as possible. At the same time, the Morticians have always been my favorite guild. They are the guild that got me into the game. So, you can see in the past where at different points where that's been a problem. Like, obviously, like I was the original playtester for the Morticians, and Season 2 Obulus happened, and ultimately that's probably more my fault than anybody else's. But I think over the period of time that I and we have learned better how to be more objective and how to be less biased about the models that we like. At the same time, my belief about the Morticians in Season 3 is that they were underrated. And I'm so glad that this recording is happening after WTC, where the Morticians were represented 6 times, just from a purely competitive standpoint, the Morticians were represented by 6 players out of 140 something, 130 something players. So they were not a very popular guild in the slightest. However, there was an undefeated Mortician player in the team that won, and I only lost one game and we finished second, and the only game I lost was to the Mortician player that won, going 5-0. So it's, I mean, I don't know if you need like a more direct method of saying Morticians are very good as long as you play them correctly. But at the same time, that also is a fair point to say that perhaps they were not the easiest to pick up and play with for everybody.
And that's
a perfectly fair accusation.
The ethos that you've laid out for season 4 is one of accessibility, is one of ease of access, is one of simplicity. So how do you then juggle what has historically been quite a complicated guild, quite a guild where with quite a high entry point, where, you know, if you look on Gubs and people going, I'm interested in getting into Guild Ball, where would you recommend you start? Somewhere in that conversation, someone will go, maybe Morticians are the second guild. Same thing with the Hunters, same things with the Blacksmiths in many ways. People sort of saying these are not entry-level guilds. So how do you balance a complicated and rewarding play style with the general ethos of Season 4 being more simple, more streamlined?
There are only so many things you can do. The Morticians are still going to be one of the more complicated teams that we have, just because of that's the definition of control. Control is not an easy thing to understand, an easy thing to teach or learn, and that's because playing a control team requires you to have a good knowledge base, not only of your own team but of the teams you're playing against, and understanding their capabilities. So they're never going to be the simplest team that's in the game, but we have made a number of steps to try to simplify them where possible, and that is by making the models that we're seeing a little bit less a little bit easier to use. Or the models that we're seeing less are also the ones that are a bit easier to use, and we made them stronger. So to give 2 examples there, Cosset and Gast, 2 of the more straightforward Morticians to play with. Cosset charged at things for free and hits things really, really hard. And that she was a bit, alternatively, she could also drag something in with Law. And the hard part, I guess, for playing with Cosset previously was that she would be taken out extremely easily in the past. And one of the things we've added to the back of her card is Back the Shadows to allow her to, I think pretty sure we have anyway, is just double check the card to make sure I'm not completely so that she can dodge backwards out of a melee once that she's done it, to make her a little bit easier to protect. If someone still manages to get to her, they're still going to take her out. She still definitely represents a glass kind of model, but she's not stuck in the opponent's face and is like super easy to take out anymore. So I'd say that's made her a little bit easier to use in terms of keeping her alive. Gast is someone that we've only made one change to, which was to increase the number of influence he brings to the team, which has gone from 1 to 2. And when you're playing when you're playing your first few games, one of the first things you'll learn is how important influence is and the amount of influence that you have. So with Gast bringing a little bit more influence to the team is someone that beginner players will hopefully be a little bit more inspired to play with. And I remember teaching my stepdaughter how to play. She desperately wanted to play Morticians. I explained to her they were not the simplest team to learn, but she was like, okay, I want to learn Morticians. Okay, fine. So I then, it was a challenge for me to make them as simple to learn as possible as a first team. And what I ended up teaching her was like a Mortician flowchart, which actually is probably not a bad idea.
Me that? That sounds like
I can talk you through it. It's only a really basic one, but I can talk you through it. But the first one I did was like influence allocation, because she really wanted to play with Cosset. Cosset was her favorite model, and she really wanted to play with Orbulus. So I was like, okay, fine. So this is the influence flow chart, and I get her to recite it. What's the influence flow chart? I'll put 3 on Gast, 2 on Cosset, at least 5 on Orbulus, and the rest where I land. Good girl. And then it was like, okay, so what model you are going to activate first? I don't know. Depends on. Well, the answer to that question is, if I'm not sure who activate first, I activate Gast and knock 3 people down. Which served her well in a lot of early games, and that's kind of what I would express as well to a lot of other beginning Mortician players, is play models like Cosset, play models like Gast that are a bit easier to use, and do things like Gast is quite clearly a model that wants to get stuck in the melee, knock a lot of models down, and that will be beneficial to you for the rest of the turn, because you will then, even if the opponent stands up one of those models, or 2 of them maybe, there will be one of those models that's still knocked down and is easier to attack later on in the turn. And those are just some basic principles of playing Guild Ball, really. It's how to set up model for being taken, and it helped her play her early games. And I would that's what I do. I also encourage for early Mortician players, if you come into the team as one of your first guilds, look at the simpler players to use, or even if you're not sure who they are, ask fellow players, ask pundits who the simpler players are. They will have been made a little bit stronger in season 4, so hopefully we've made the team a bit more accessible by making the simpler players to play a little bit stronger.
I have a question at the end of the flowchart. Is at the end of the flowchart, win with a dirge tap in goal? Is that the final step?
I mean, generally not. But when you are running out of options, you will take anything you can get. Is what I would say to that. Yeah.
I think that kind of category that like is one of the defining features of the Morticians as well, is the amount of options and just having that. Like when I play Morticians, I never feel like, oh, I have no plan here at all. There always feels like, no matter how like crazy or janky it is, like a dirge tapping goal, there is always an option on the table, and I think that's what makes them both hard to play and interesting to play.
Yeah, I mean, as an enormous Obulus fan, I wholeheartedly agree. I was asked only yesterday, how do you play Obulus? And the answer is gloriously. Because that's really the only way to approach it. So there we go. There's 20 minutes on why Obulus hasn't changed. Brilliant. We should clock it at around 6 hours for this podcast. That'll give Roll a run for their money.
It's true. I mean, we also mentioned Cosset and Gas there, I guess.
No, absolutely.
We cheated.
I do want to come back on those folks. But I suppose the big captain change, and the one that certainly when I came up to the playtest event in July, was it July or August?
July,
something like that. And certainly the one that you could see it first of all, I would wholly encourage anyone that is able to go to the playtest events to go to the playtest event. You don't have to be like top table tournament competition winners to have a valid input at playtest events. It is also about how models are fun to use and whether you get what they're meant to be doing. So if you can go, do go, because they are brilliant days. In the beginning, Jamie was doing a presentation, sort of reading everything, and with most people that you put on screen, and I won't go through them because other podcasts will handle that. There was kind of like a murmuring, couple of questions, and then moving on. And Scalpel went up on screen, and then there was just like this. You could watch it, this kind of ripple through the audience.
Well, I remember that. I gave it a few seconds, and there was complete silence. I was like, people just reading the card. They've not got it yet. Wait for it. And I was like, okay, read voodoo strings. I waited about another 5 seconds, and everyone went, "Oh!"
Yeah. I loved that moment. That was brilliant because everyone just kind of went, "Oh, hang on." So, kind of, why have Steve? Why have all the push dodgers gone? Why has Tormented Agony gone? Why have you stripped my favourite captain of all her character? No, I'm joking. So Tormented Agony, in my mind, was handy in very, very situational cases, but clearly you guys have decided it wasn't doing what it was intended to do. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Tormented Agony as an ability is such a hard one to balance because it fits within that difficult place of that it's either too good or not good enough, and I feel like it in its old incarnation it just wasn't good enough a lot of the time. Like situationally it was brilliant, but a lot of the time I tended to see Scalpel just go in, make some attacks, push dodge a model around, do some damage, and then probably second wind out. And Tormented Agony felt like the sort of thing that should be an exciting thing about this model because it's a Mortician style control ability, but just didn't really work out as well as we would have liked. And then in terms of just her overall design, I think we just weren't happy with Scalpel in the fact that she didn't feel like a Mortician. She didn't feel like she was controlling as much as we would want her to. So that's where we sort of started to look at, well, what can we give her? And Obulus has this controls a single model very well with Puppet Master, allowing you to kick, allowing you to move it. So we started to look at, well, what if you could control every model a very small amount by pushing them? And I vividly remember it was after a playtest night that we have at the office, and we were talking about what we were going to do with Scalpel, and we'd had this idea of maybe she pushes models, and we just had this light bulb moment of kind of what if it could be friendly and enemy. And I think me and Jamie had both finished our game, we had that discussion. We're like, let's go write this card. And that's where the first version of Scalpel with those voodoo strings happened. And it changed throughout playtesting. Originally, we have this ethos of test broken and then bring it down to make sure that we have an identity for the character. So originally that aura was really big. It was very silly.
It was a 10-inch aura in the first edition, in the first incarnation.
Yeah, and
so that's the whole pitch, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that was brought up multiple times during the testing of the model, is that voodoo strings was the sacred bit of her card. That was going to be her identity. So a lot of the balancing of her was to make sure that voodoo strings could stay intact.
Okay.
Because we think that is a cool rule, and it is just makes her unique to play and makes her feel like that Mortician that we wanted her to be.
Yeah, I remember sort of talking with you, Jamie, and Steve actually at the playtest, where we're talking. The elevator pitch being that Obvious does one model very, very well, and Scalpel has a sort of more broad approach across the team. And I have to say, I absolutely love this ability. I, much like other people, you look at the playbook first. It's just kind of what we get used to doing as Guild Ball players. You look at the playbook first, and I had that same reaction as so many other people of, oh, where have all the push dodges gone? And then you look at voodoo strings, and I personally immediately forgot that all the push dodges had gone, because I've said it a few times on this podcast, and it bears repeating that the great lie of podcasting is that the one thing that's more important than anything else in any miniatures game, especially skirmish miniatures game, is positioning. And any ability which has a direct impact on you or your opponent's positioning, you can never value that high enough. And I've been saying for a while now, sort of within with Panzer and Connor and the rest of the media team who've had these cards a little bit in advance, is that someone is going to take Scalpel, someone is going to use her at tournaments, and someone's going to burn the world, and people are not going to see it coming. Because my God, voodoo strings is good. And I remember being at the playtest, and I've got Ghast, I've got Scalpel, I've got an opponent with Catalyst within 6 inches of each other. It's like, sweet, I'm going to go and stab someone else, and all of a sudden Ghast is engaged in Catalyst and he hasn't engaged. And Catalyst with his 1-inch melee can't engage Ghast back, and I've made that happen, and now that's a real problem that my opponent has to deal with. And I've done 6 damage momentously to something else. So yeah, I love this, and like I say, someone is going to ruin face with it, and I can't wait to watch it happen. What do you mean? But you mentioned one thing there, sort of the original Scalpel design, which is still present on the card, but it's changed quite considerably and has sort of wider implications to all of Guild Ball. And that's the changes to Second Wind, both in making it a 4-inch dodge and making it friendly guild models only. Could you sort of talk me through the decision process there?
So essentially one of the things we were noticing with Second Wind was it was becoming very prevalent within the overall sort of Guild Ball community.
Yes.
I think the point that really showed it to us and really solidified it was when me and Bryce went over to French Nationals, and pretty much the only Union player we saw people take was regular Decimate, and they were taking her for Second Wind.
For Second Wind, sure.
Yeah. So it was one of those where it had gotten to the point where it seemed like everyone was taking her to promote this standoffish play style of, I go in, I make some attacks, or if I'm someone like Engineers, I take some range character plays and then Second Wind back to safety. And it's one of those where it's a play style that we don't really want to promote within the game, because we want both players to be playing the game. Mm-hmm. And turns out it's quite difficult to play the game when your opponent comes in, does some stuff, and then just goes away to the other side of the table. So we started to look at ways that we could change that. And the best way we felt was to make it a fixed value of how far you moved, because it was one of those where on certain models it was fine. If you had a really short movement value, it was fine. But It was those longer value models like Decimate with buffs and in the Brewers and so on that were the problem. So we decided on that fixed value. And we've never done within the game the idea of a fixed jog. So we then started to look at, well, what does this look like if it's, like where'd he go, but at the end of an activation?
Makes sense.
And it's one of those where the distance is shorter, but it is better in some ways, because if I'm attacking, I don't have to worry about disengaging my opponent with my final attack. I can do everything I want to do, and then I can get out of their melee range.
Yeah, it also kind of brings back knee slider. In that you can have it on a striker, go in, run the length, second wind away, so you still got that kind of play style, kind of. But now you're paying a resource for it rather than it just being a card that you've got in your hand. So sort of to sum your points up there, Steve, is you wanted to avoid a play style where people just kind of stay at either end of their pitch and do everything at range.
Yeah, or the other thing that we saw with Brewers was a model, mostly Decimate, goes in, does some damage, then second wins out of there. Because it wasn't just range plays that were the problem, it was just interacting with your opponent and then moving away, essentially.
So once more, you have written rules to change the outcome of our game at these singled out tournaments. That's fine, Steve. That's fine. That rematch is long overdue anyway. Sorry, Jamie, you were winding up for a pitch there.
No, that's fine. Basically, just to take it down to its sort of simplest principle. If one person is getting to engage with the game and have fun and roll dice at their opponent, and the other person isn't getting to do any of that at all, then only one of those people is likely to be having fun, right? So there is a number of changes overall that have been driven by the core principle that we want both players to be engaged with each other at the same time and being able to do stuff and roll dice, right? We want to minimize the number of situations where that is only happening for one player. And it's interesting, really, that at this point right now where we're recording this, obviously people haven't got all this information yet. So one of the things that we've seen being talked about in the precursor to this is that it's curious that we have shown a lot of models off that have ranged knockdowns, which I think is going to move. We'll get onto Veteran Hemlock later on, but obviously, I'm going to be saying this on all the recordings as well, is that, whilst it's true we've shown a lot of those range knockdowns off, people won't have seen at that point is that there is more anti-condition tech within the game, and obviously having 100%. A momentum point when you're the kicker at the start of the game will obviously mitigate that as well. So there definitely has been an increase in range knockdown, but we don't believe that is going to prevent this increased level of player interactivity that we're after.
Yeah. So sort of one last thing on Scalpel. Aside from being an enormous Dragon Ball Z fan, what was the sort of reasoning behind the inclusion of Spirit Bomb?
I think you should take this, Perkins, because I think that was your idea.
Seems reasonable.
So one-inch melee zone captains need to have a method of engaging every single different kind of opponent, whether that's by dodging into an unpredictable movement enemy. I mean, mainly it's unpredictable movement, I guess. And they need to have a method of engaging any different type of enemy that they want. So this is basically Scalpel's method of doing that, Spirit Bomb. So she's got some dodges on her playbook. Obviously, she can voodoo strings herself if she wants to, but she can only voodoo strings herself once per turn. So Spirit Bomb is her method of ensuring that she can get into any model that she likes and have that be a reasonably favorable situation. So if she's thinking about going into a scrum and she's looking at it going, well, the only points I can get into this scrum, I'm going to be in like 4 or 5 melee zones, and I don't want to just use voodoo strings to clear all that up. I want it to be doing things that I don't want to be setting out a bad situation. I want to be engineering a positive situation. So if she wants to, she can just pull the pin off a Spirit Bomb grenade and throw that in first, and then start sorting that situation out before she's even gone in there and gone into those melee zones. But she has to. But at the same time, we didn't want her doing that from quite a long distance away, because that's very strong. So the original range for Spirit Bomb was higher. So she has to still be playing. The question that a Scalpel player is always going to be asking is, how at risk of Scalpel being taken out am I?
Yeah.
Because second wind can't get you that far away. player but dodges, etc. can't get you that far away. You can get quite a big distance away if you start engage with the opponent and then run away afterwards and then second wind. Sure, that's fine. But that's not a super common situation. The more common situation is I'm going to activate, move into melee, do some damage, and then leave melee with second wind. Probably anyway. So and the Mortician players are going to be asking themselves, how much at risk of death is Scalpel, and how much of these abilities do I have to use not only to engineer positive situations for me and my team, but to engineer situations where Scalpel won't just get taken out immediately afterwards.
Sure.
Especially since Voodoo Strings doesn't work on her counterattacks. So she actually has, for a captain, she actually has quite a weak counterattack as well as a one-hit zone. So.
That's fair. And we've seen this in season 3 with Scaffer, her ability to proc Cold Snap from the playbook, and now seeing Spirit Bomb on Scalpel's playbook is very exciting. It's something that took me a long time to realise, and I bring it up here just to sort of mention it, just in case people aren't familiar with triggering AoEs from the playbook, but just so you have it all in one place with things related to Morticians. Just to confirm with you chaps that AoEs triggered from the playbook hit their targets automatically. There will be no need for separate dice rolls for that Spirit Bomb when you lay it down.
That is correct. Yes.
That's amazing. That is because I don't think when this card went up that people have looked at that, because it's not a thing we've seen. It's not something we're used to doing. Because even Scaffer, that triggerable Cold Snap from the playbook, what was it, on 5, if I remember rightly? Didn't come up that often. Because if you're charging with Scaffer, you're probably looking to do something else. So yeah, automatic AoE hits, people. That's a thing. Make use, enjoy. So moving on to Dirge. Oh, yep, sorry, Shep, carry on.
I was just going to say, it's something that we definitely explored a lot more in Season 4 just generally, is AoEs off the playbook.
Oh, there you go. Little spoilers or foreshadowing of things to come. So moving on to Dirge, he's had some changes. Yes, he's a bit hardier, which is nice. Any Mortician that gains health is just fine by me, so I was a big fan of that. But certainly the changes from Tagalong, from follow-up to Tagalong, is the massive change on Dirge's card. Whilst this makes me very excited for setting up Cosset bombs, as they become colloquially known, is that the reason behind it? Is that the sort of to take out the activation requirement of moving Dirge into a position first and then going in with Cosset so you can put them both in together? Is that kind of why we've seen this change?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a similar thing to the making models easier to use, and one of the things, and because of how closely linked Dirge and Cosset are because of the assist, one of the things that makes Cosset harder to use is the assist from Dirge and having Dirge in the correct place. So Tagalong was one of those rules that was brought in to make that easier, to bring this model that sees less play, make it easier for a player to use them. Yeah,
it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, we've already discussed, it makes sense whilst we're talking about Dirge to talk about Cosset. We've already seen the Back to the Shadows being put in to make her less fragile, and particularly if she's got second wind from Scalpel on as well. That's a very nice 8-inch removal of yourself from an engagement. But the only real other change there is Crazy. And its absence. Can you talk me through that design decision?
Do you want to go with that, Perkins?
Yeah, sure. That was a couple of places. One is it was feeling a little bit of, for lack of a better phrase, an outdated rule for a number of different reasons. In that we'd made Crazy, we'd done different edits to Crazy in the past, different erratas and previous edition seasons to make it work properly. And it just felt like an extra element of complexity that didn't need to be there, when we could just have her as a static attack that was appropriate for the model. In addition to that, the rule Crazy is not necessarily, for lack of a better phrase, super politically correct, or even just it's not a particularly nice thing to. You've got to address issues of mental health carefully, basically, and I'm not sure that having a rule like Crazy is fair way to do that.
It didn't have a pleasant connotation to it, so you've taken it out. I think that's right. I think that's highly commendable, gentlemen.
Thank you. But that's kind of all there is to it. It felt a bit old-fashioned. It wasn't always working as necessarily as well could, and we didn't think it dealt with the issues of mental health in a particularly fair way. So.
No, highly commendable. So I don't think we need to spend much more time on Cosset, as we kind of talked about that with Dirge. Vileswarm is certainly someone that's seen a lot of changes. So similar questions then to Scalpel, as we discussed earlier, is what was it about what Vileswarm was doing, or rather wasn't doing, that led to sort of such a violent change to his card, Steve?
I'm trying to think the best way to address this, really.
Because certainly, like, if you spoke to a lot of people, were big fans of Dirge as the main mascot that you dropped in Morticians, whereas as a ball retrieval piece or as an assist piece, whereas you speak to Dave Cameron, certainly one of the community's more notable Morticians players, he's always, or has since the loss of Sikkim, been a huge fan of Vileswarm, just through terms of influence, efficiency, and getting momentum from that, what was the double momentous push on 2. So for him to go from sort of a positioning piece to gain more health and to gain what a playbook that is, frankly. So talk me through your decision-making process on this one, because it's one that raised eyebrows, I think.
So I think the thing with Vileswarm was that he seemed to be underplayed, and I think there are a few reasons for that. One of the big reasons was with mascots, you often want them to be doing things you either want a lot of value out of the influence you put on them, or you want to be able to get value without any influence on them. You look at certain models like Quaff is a good example. He does stuff without influence, but you can put influence on him to get something really good out of him. Where it felt like Vileswarm, even with the Vindictive that he had previously, where he got a charge for 1 less, still felt like that you weren't getting enough value out of him. And also because of Vindictive being tied to a charge, was that Vileswarm would go in, get his cheaper charge, and then he was just kind of stuck there in the scrum and didn't really do a whole lot when he was there, because it always felt like assigning him 1 to make an attack was never really worth it. So when we had a look at this Vileswarm, it was a case of how can we make him worth using, and how can we fix this problem of where he gets stuck in and just can't get out. And you see that very much in Scatter.
I love the cinematic of that.
Yeah. It's a perfect rule for what is a swarm of rats that just, it all scatters, then reforms somewhere else. And him moving to Furious means that you can put 1 on him, you can scatter, and then you can access this Furious again, which just makes him a lot easier to use and doesn't get him sort of bogged down in the scrum and then just sitting there as a gang up against models and so on. And then I think the other big thing, and this is kind of a more wide sweeping change, is Noxious Death. Was one of those rules where I think for me, Noxious Death was one of the reasons not to bring Vileswarm previously, because the fact that he could die, he would do damage and poison to everyone within range. I've had that be a problem more than a few times, where someone comes in, pops the Vileswarm while he's amongst my team. My whole team takes damage and gets poisoned, which is a nightmare for Morticians when they have such low health pools. You're taking 3 damage and then perhaps even the 2 from the poison. 5 damage on a lot of Morticians. They are not in a happy place. Yeah, exactly. So you'll notice that now Noxious Death only affects enemy models, and that's kind of a global change for a lot of different rules. Compound is an example of that, with him blowing up.
I hadn't even noticed it was enemies only. Oh my god.
Yeah. So you can now play the Vileswarm grenade and, unmasking and kill your own Vileswarm.
I mean, that's always been the dream, is the unmasking Noxious Death. I've never once made it work, but it's there. It's possible, probably. And I don't think we can talk about Varstorm without immediately talking about veteran Graves. So, Jamie, just wanted to bring this in, you on this one as well. You talked on the blog for the Ratcatchers about how the snack digger playstyle, for want of a better expression, wasn't something that you were enjoying. It wasn't something that you had envisioned for the Ratcatchers at the beginning. So, with the removal of Gravedigger, is there anything else you wanted to say on that? As you got sort of a microphone rather than a blog at this stage?
So, Veteran Graves is a model that is particularly difficult to develop, and has been twice, because he's got a lot of different things you need to take into account. One is he's got two quite different play styles he needs to meet both of. Now, the majority of minor guilds all minor guilds have about 2 degrees of separation in terms of their play style from their parent guild. So even though the Falconers are less about control than the Hunters are, they are a little bit more into the melee damage, but the Hunters are still quite good at the melee damage as well. It's not completely divergent playstyle.
Yep.
The Morticians of the Rats are probably the most divergent, I guess, because even though they do have the same sort of 2 degrees of separation, because some Morticians are so close to being able to do football, like on the sliding scale of football and scoring goals and scoring takeouts, the Morticians are probably slightly more towards takeouts of center, and the Rats are probably slightly more towards goal scoring of center, and that's probably gone a little bit more so in season 4, just because we were a little bit more forceful in like removing the snack digger, etc. But Graves has to satisfy. Graves and Bonesaw have to help satisfy both of those win conditions, as well as being the fact that they're part of the control team. And at the same time, Veteran Graves is a veteran model, so we have to take into account that he has to compete with his normal version, and on top of that, his normal version has one of the most highly valued character plays in the game, Tooled Up. There's a lot of different factors coming into play here that make this
You've taken Tooled Up out of the game now. It's fine.
Oh, completely. It's gone completely. No, that's a lie.
That's not true.
Not at all. And Tooled Up still is on normal Graves. Normal Graves hasn't had any changes at all. So Veteran Graves has to take all of those different things into account, and has to be a strong enough model to be balanced against a Tooled Up non-veteran counterpart. I think we've done okay.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how people react to Veteran Graves. But the things that we've done have tried to take all of that different things into account. I mean, he still helps out with a little bit in melee. Exhaustion and They Ain't Tough are two both very, very powerful melee abilities, and they also help the control playstyle out of both teams quite well.
Yeah.
And I think they're a fair replacement. Go on, sorry.
Knockdown They Ain't Tough on 2.
Yep.
It's
a pretty savage result.
Yep.
Especially with his new heroic of giving, in this case, Varswarm, but Varswarm will squeak an additional 2 influence. Is like to hero story just a very small amount from the playtest, just to give you an idea, handy listener, of what you can achieve with this. I was playing against co-host Mr. Panzer Harris, trying out the new Alchemists. And one of the models that we weren't testing on that day was Catalyst, so he was exactly the same original Catalyst, so 3s and 1s, and all of the health under the world. I'd already killed somebody else, who shall remain nameless, on his team, so I was up an activation. Graves goes into Catalyst with 1 influence on him. Knockdowns, They Ain't Tough, so Catalyst is now knocked down with Stagger. Puts 2 influence on Varswarm. I then activate Varswarm, who charges in. Gets 8 hits on the charge, so that's wrapped 3 times, and then promptly 1 rounds Catalyst. It's not okay, or okay, depending on your perspective. I'm very happy about this. I'll be interested to see how it goes down. But yeah, it's really interesting to see. As you mentioned, there you have to double. It's one of the reasons I was very interested when you introduced the concept of minor guilds, that the crossover models seemed to be veterans, and now admittedly with navigators that combo was broken, and I almost breathed a sigh of relief on your behalf, because surely the veteran models are harder to balance in a minor guild situation than anyone else, because you not only have to balance them against their original counterpart, but also the guild that they're going into.
Yeah.
Having tooled up the non-existent ability that's being removed from the game, and they ain't tough balanced against each other, is really interesting for me. Really interesting, because you're using them effectively to do the same job, to impact the maths of your attacks. So, and this is going to be a really, really nice job, because let's say, take for example, blacksmiths. Do I need tooled up against the apprentices in blacksmiths? No, probably not. Can I use They Ain't Tough to reduce not only their traditionally low defense and their armor, be that in the form of a sentinel or not? Yes, massively I can. So I think, gentlemen, you've done a really good job here of balancing the two across from one another. I'm a huge fan of new veteran Graves and can't wait to see him on the pitch.
I'm so glad to hear that, because he was, I think it's safe to say, he was quite a problem model for us within Season 4. He changed an awful lot.
I certainly think in terms of the two models we spent the most time working on for the Morticians, it was definitely Scalpel and Veteran Graves. They took more time. They took more of our time than any other two models, I think. Any other models in the guild, certainly.
Yeah.
And just to go on about the what we did for them in the Ratcatchers as well a little bit we've talked about how They Ain't Tough and Exhaustion are good in the Morticians, but They Ain't Tough and Exhaustion are also like equally good in the Ratcatchers, mainly because even though They Ain't Tough can be used for outputting a lot more damage, it's just generally good for making any kind of melee attacks. The fish would love to have They Ain't Tough. Obviously, they've got weak points instead. But even modifying armor is good for making any kind of melee attack, whether you're looking to attack the ball, or take the ball off them, or do knockdowns, or cause damage. It's all good for everybody, which is why They Ain't Tough was an appropriate thing to put on Veteran Graves' card. It equally help out the Ratcatchers as well as the Morticians, as well as Exhaustion as well. Probably a little bit less for Exhaustion because the Ratcatchers play a little bit more spread out than the Morticians do, perhaps. But certainly They Ain't Tough will be very good for them. On top of that, you've got the momentous tackle on 1 with a 2-inch melee zone, always good for a team that wants to score a lot of goals.
100%.
The Ratcatcher, we've slightly increased the Ratcatcher's access to knockdown in Season 4. That both on Skulk's playbook, the knockdown has come down a little bit, and the knockdown on Veteran Graves' card has come down from being on the 3rd column to being on the 2nd column. So they've got a little bit better access to knockdown now. That's going to help them as well, just to slow enemies down a little bit, and obviously retrieve the ball in certain situations. Close control, something the Ratcatchers didn't have access to, just somewhere safe to put the ball for a turn or two on a chap that's got reasonably good counter attacks, having access to knockdown, pushes, and obviously low down tackle. That's quite good for defending the ball. And then obviously also the fact that you mentioned his heroic play for putting influence on Valswarm, that can also be used on Squeak as well. So I think in these respects that we've hopefully allowed Veteran Graves to fit in quite well with both the Morticians and the Ratcatchers, and I think that's good.
Even though he's lost Gravedigger and therefore the playstyle associated with it, I think you're going to see him more. I've sort of long argued locally that I wanted a close control model in Morticians. My preference for that was Skulk. I was, if you turned around to this change, excuse me, and Skulk had lost, say, Poised and gained close control, I would have been very, very happy. I think
Skulk needs to be more annoying, clearly.
Yes, 100%. Well, no, and I'm going to have the same argument with you now, Steve, that I've had many times locally. That I think Skulk having close control would be less powerful than somebody else having close control. Because what you're going to see now is models are going to put, I'm going to put the ball on Veteran Graves, and then as my first activation, I'm going to stand Skulk nearby with Horrific Odor and Pest Control. The advantage there being that Veteran Graves hasn't activated yet. So I've killed the ball, but still can move. And so I've no idea whether I'm right on this, but I look forward to having this argument on the pitch with my opponents locally rather than just in WhatsApp.
It'll certainly be really interesting to see how people use Veteran Graves, because you've mentioned him there as being something that is could be useful as a mid to late activation, but you can also see him as being an exceptionally good early activation as well.
100%.
Obviously, getting They Ain't Tough out early is going to be really, really useful. And one of the things I've loved so far is just being able to go, I'll activate first with Veteran Graves. You've got some really, really good counter-attacking models here, so that's fine. I'll just spend the 1 for Exhaustion, walk into those models, and then you can't counter-attack me. And I'll knock a few people down, put They Ain't Toughs out. Or even better, if he's going second even, or if the opponent has the first activation, and they've still generated 2 to 3 momentum, they can counter-attack him. And I still like putting Exhaustion anyway. I was doing it. We played a game with Matt Doran of Roll Better fame a couple of weeks ago, and they came up to record. and he always had the momentum to counter attack veteran Graves, and I just loved asking the question every time. So I've got exhaustion up. Do you want to counter at me? And he'd be like, no, I can't. I'm like, well, you can. You can if you want to, Matt. He's like, no, stop it.
It's nice to see the dilemma, like more of the dilemmas coming across, because of course we had that with Pelage. We had that to a certain extent in Skulk. Just you don't want to go anywhere near him and be annoyed with him. So it's nice to see that come across with Vet Graves as well. So speaking of Ratcatchers, seamless segue, seamless. Bonesaw, the worst model in the world, apparently. This has been, you know, when you know something in advance. And it's difficult.
I do, Thomas.
I'm not familiar at all. I don't know what you're on about.
But you know, for you guys, you know, it's your job. That's cool. And I'm sure you've got many irons in the fire already. But for us that aren't used to it, one of the more difficult things about doing what we do is knowing things in advance and not telling people. And it's legitimately very difficult. And but there we are. It's first world problems. Watching the Free Cities draft, which is, we're well underway at the moment, but no one really knows what the conclusion will be. And I've no idea how that will change when this comes out. Is watching all the Morticians players going, we need a new striker, Bonesaw is terrible. We need a new striker, Bonesaw is terrible. And me not being able to go, shut up. Like, you're going to be fine. Because, my God, I love new Bonesaw. Kickoffs with Bonesaw are now a thing. Oh, Jesus. Of just being able to, I've kicked off with Bonesaw, I'm going to walk, I'm going to charge you, I'm in your lines, I'm doing whatever I want. So I think he's a really good example of how you've simplified things. Like the football dervish going away, the swift wind sort of going from being a heroic into just an ability on his card, offensively defensive, just becoming part of his card. So is that all being motivated purely through streamlining, just purely for making things quicker and more accessible?
You're on foot, Steve, or am I doing it?
I don't mind. You can take this.
Cool.
It's a Ratcatcher.
It is. That's true. So Bonesaw is a model that we had a decent talk about in the beginning, and then we identified a clear path for him. And the first conversation was, do we need to go back and completely rewrite this model? Because obviously we knew there were lots of big problems for him, and he unfortunately, as can occasionally happen, he become the butt of jokes during season 3, which it's just something we never want to see. But when something gets pointed out and it's not changed for a while, then that can happen. So we had to have that serious conversation about what we want to do with him. Could we save this model in the form it had? And we decided, yes, that's what we were going to do, because we believe that we could do that. And even though it require making one quite in-depth change, which was the switch. The biggest change, obviously, I guess, is the switch of Football Dervish being removed and replaced with Stamina. Now, they both achieve quite similar things in that they extend Bonesaw's threat range. One of them requires him to do quite a lot of janky stuff using momentum and kicking mechanics, and takes quite a lot of time to do, and also takes quite a lot of knowledge of the core rules of the game as well to understand which models can dodge and how that all functions mechanically, or just he's got Stamina, he makes an extra jog. So much simpler, and achieves a lot of the same stuff without the requirement of dice rolls, etc. as well. Doesn't overbalance the model. Not that phrase. Doesn't overpower the model. In any way, really, because he's still a one-man his own model at the end of the day. He still can have issues with getting into things like unpredictable movement, etc. But either way, we were happy with the fact it wasn't going to make him too powerful, and it wasn't going to remove too many of the questions either. It's still a very interesting model to use a lot of at the time. But he was basically just overall too complicated. And that's kind of summed up in the change of Swiftwind to Football Dervish to Stamina. So,
certainly with the change. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the other thing as well with losing Football Dervish is the number of times I saw players who were excited about Bonesaw and liked Bonesaw use that rule, and they set up this amazing goal run, and it's all going to be great, and then they fail a die roll, and it just, messes up their turn. And the number of times I saw that, and it's one of those where it's a just unfortunate thing, and I think puts people off Bonesaw as well, and put people off the old Bonesaw, because it's not fun to make this really elaborate plan and then to fail a 3-die kick, or in some cases a 2-die kick with Morticians. So I think as well this change makes him more fun to use because you haven't got that massive risk of him just sinking your turn.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Like all three of us play Morticians. All three of us play Morticians quite a lot. And I don't know about you, gentlemen, but certainly what I can't remember what the official name for it is, but what we know locally is Kiki Receivi. That dice roll at the beginning of the game, the sort of flow chart in my head of the results, 75% of those results result in Obulus kicking. So if I win the roll off, I'm going to kick. If my opponent wins the roll off and chooses for me to kick, I'm kicking with Obulus. And if the only time Bonesaw would be in my team was if my opponent won the roll and my opponent elected to kick. So 25% of the results. That was it, and that was the only time I would then put Bonesaw down on the table. And in many ways, that would also then dictate that Silence went in my team and that Graves went in my team because they had the 3-6 kicks to be able to support Whirling Dervish. So I didn't feel comfortable with him when I was kicking. I only felt comfortable when I was receiving, and I elected to receive less than any other time. So he was so situationally on my team that eventually he just dropped further and further and further down my roster to the point where he fell out of the 10 because I could probably have a different plan if I wanted to. And I don't know if that was your experience, but that's certainly sort of how Bonesaw I fell out of love with Bonesaw during season 3.
I think that's fair. Certainly, I've certainly heard a lot as well that people would only really take Bonesaw when receiving, and as you just outlined in quite a lot of detail, their Morticians are quite comfortable when kicking the ball. But it's same for me and Steve. When we've played Obulus a lot, we quite enjoy kicking off with him because he's very strong in that situation. And when you are not planning to score a goal with season 3 Bonesaw in the first turn, then he will often spend a lot of the time being a liability because he hasn't got that extra. He wouldn't have scored the goal, would have got the extra defense from offensive defense, etc. And would often just be a bit of a weight on your team, really. So we didn't want that to be the case anymore. We wanted him to be a useful model all the time, regardless of the situation. And I think we did achieve that overall. And to switch back over to Ratcatchers for just a second as well, one of the things that was preventing them from being more of a goal-scoring focused team was their inability to chase down a dead ball. Their only real model for doing that was Piper when he's reveries another model just to sprint after a dead ball, which is very expensive for him. And with Bonesaw now being able to just use his obviously stamina to get extra distance on his own, he's a model that can go a long distance in a vacuum without needing the ball in the first place. Because obviously, if you're using the ball, you're not chasing down a dead ball. So those two things don't obviously are mutually exclusive. And will hopefully help out the Ratcatchers a little bit more with the goal scoring game. So
yeah, makes sense. Cool. Probably my favourite players in Morticians, Brain Pan and Memory, haven't changed at all. Yay, I love this. Is that, again, just simply like it was with Obulus, just working as intended?
Pretty much. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of Brain Pan and Memory. I think Perkins is an even bigger fan of Brain Pan and Memory. Like, I run them a lot. I don't think Perkins ever drops them from his lineup.
I find it very hard.
During season 3, the only time I wouldn't play them was against Veteranox because he's a very easy way to trigger the old ways, which I found out the hard way once and never repeat.
Yes.
Other than that, whenever I was playing,
you telling me about it, and I've never put them in since.
Right. But in every single other matchup, basically my first 2 drops every single time would be normal Graves and Brain Pan and Memory. And what makes me excited about playing Morticians in season 4 is that that's not as much of a straight choice anymore. And Brain Pan and Memory not having to change is definitely a part of that. They're already good enough as they are. Normal Grave, not having to change is a part of that. They're already good enough as they are, but making these other models good enough to be legitimate alternative choices there and making that decision harder is something that makes me excited to play Morticians. But that just wasn't a choice for me, and I'm sure it wasn't a choice for many other Mortician players in season 3, unfortunately.
No, I'm very happy to see them pretty much the same. I adore that little puppet and his memory dance. And much like, for you, if I remember rightly, for you it was Graves, Brenpan and Memory, and then usually Ghast as your third drop. Whereas for me, my sort of default first three off the bench were Brainpan and Memory, Graves, and then the next man, Casket. Who is a really interesting one. It's the big change. Well, there is a big change on the card, and then there's a big change not on the card, if that makes sense for me. The foul loader now being enemy only. Now the really good thing here is of course that one of the things I think I've heard you discuss about in the past, which is if I forget one of my rules, that should penalise me, not you. So if I had in the past forgotten, as I think I've done on Don't Touch the Beard and a couple of, especially in the early days, is if I forget foul loader when, say, moving one of my own players up, that penalises my opponent. Is that the driving force between foul loader going to enemy only?
I mean, partially. It's also just, I guess yes, but I would mainly call that as being wrapped up in the simplicity and reducing complexity that we've been talking about for season 4 in general. Not having to remember that, and then you follow that train of thought down to the path that you just led down, really, which is if you then forget that, what are the differences on the games that have? Sometimes it has quite massive differences, and ultimately, if you are forgetting that, then it's at the detriment, as you say, to your opponent rather than to you. Which is, and that can cause some awkward situations in games. Sometimes it's just something we want to avoid. So it's a nice element of cleanup, and you can wrap this up really in the same line of changes that we've made to Overheat and Noxious Death. In that, when you've got passive abilities like that, they shouldn't be. When you've got passive abilities that can affect both players, it shouldn't be controllable by both players. So one of the ways of solving that is just not making it affect both players, if that makes some sense.
Yeah. 100%.
So it's not. I remember playing a lot of games. To take a different example, I remember playing a lot of games against Alchemists, and a lot of other people will have done as well. Seeing Flask and going, Flask's in a good place right now, where if I kill him, he'll do a lot of damage to his nearby friendly models.
Yeah.
And not having that be a thing is, I think, is a positive for the players playing with the models that have those rules. That's a really, really complicated way of saying that, but I think it made sense. And just an element of reduced complexity overall, and I think it's a positive thing for the game. But at the same time, one of the areas where we haven't done that is rules that are entirely within your control. So Scything Blow, the Unmasking, similar abilities that affect friendly and enemy models, but they are entirely at your control as when you use them. So
you don't have to trigger that by rig result.
Absolutely. You can position the model in an entirely different manner so that doesn't happen. So it is completely in your control when that occurs, so they still hit friendly models. But abilities that are not always entirely in your control, they will only affect enemies now. Is the best way of summing that up, I think.
So we've seen elsewhere, certainly with Scourge, who we'll come to in a little while, and Vet Graves, who we've already talked about, the victory point accelerant abilities, for want of a better word, being taken away. So why is Casket Time such an integral part of his core design that you couldn't lose it, or are you happy for Morticians to have access to VP Accelerant in this traditional way?
I mean, for lack of a better answer, yes, to your first part, which is that Casket Time is one of the most fundamental expressions of control in a control team, and that it is generating extra victory points. It is taking out a model for a whole extra turn, so you don't get that model back. You don't get to play with them. You're an extra activation down. It only happens once, and it is on a model that, because Ghast is now coming to the team generating 2 influence, Casket doesn't do that anymore. Doesn't also do that, so he still only generates 1 influence for the team. You're paying an influence penalty to bring him along for an ability that is exceptionally powerful, but is ultimately extremely thematic with the guild. And obviously we're going to come on to that change off the card that you mentioned earlier, which is that models will, in season 4, you will always have to bring your models back onto the pitch. You don't have the option of leaving them off anymore. So if you're in that situation where you don't want to bring them back on, you can just put them in the corner if you don't want to play with them. If you don't want to have them risk being taken out, they always have to come back on. However, in the situation where a model is staying off the pitch, which in this case now is only Casket Time, then that model will still generate influence. So in the situation where Morticians are playing against Butchers and they've managed to casket time Ox, the Butcher player won't get Ox back for the next turn. They're still going to have to play without him, but they will at least get his 4 influence points. And the main reason we've done this is so it's less of a potential negative play experience. We don't hear Casket being complained about a lot. We used to in the old days, and we've made changes to Casket before to fix those issues. We don't hear a lot of complaints about Casket now, so this is preempting something, which is that we believe that the Morticians have been an underplayed team in Season 3. They are going to be played more in Season 4, and Casket's going to be an extremely popular model because he always has been. Therefore, we're going to see a lot more of Casket time, and the potential for that, particularly against newer players, to be a negative play experience is quite high. So we're just tempering that slightly by allowing models that are Casket timed to still generate influence, basically.
No, just to summarise there, I'm going to say this loudly and slowly for Timmy all the way in Germany. You have to bring your models back onto the pitch, unlike last weekend.
Correct.
Well played, sir. Well played. But it is interesting that I mean, we talked about this in the play test. That I was like, but I love casket time in Grange because there's nothing funnier than going, you don't have 5 influence this turn. And
I would be laughing. I'd be laughing right along with you as a Mortician coach.
Yes. However, for the sake of our farmer compatriots, they still get the influence. Which, you know, I'll take that. Like, at first, I was a bit, but no, I'll take that. Is there anything else anyone wants to go on Casket before moving on?
Not really. I think that's pretty much everything on him.
I'm going to break your one rule of not talking about tactics. I'm going to break your one rule of not talking about tactics and positioning. There is.
It's the great lie.
It's a rule. It's a rule. It's very draconian. I don't like it. Anyway, when playtesting Season 4 Casket, one of the things that I really enjoyed actually was something I didn't do at all in Season 3 is just because of that change to foul order. What you can do now is you can kick off with a captain. And I was tending to do Scalpel, being the model that we were playtesting a lot. Kick off with Scalpel. And then the first activation, if Scalpel didn't want to go, was to actually bring Casket up, stand Casket next to Scalpel, drop down the Ghostly Visage on both of them, and then you just kind of have this Fort Mort. You kind of have this little Fort Mort where nobody can really come near you because of foul order and Ghostly Visage. And, or they can, but just not very particularly easily. But Scalpel is still free at any point to leave the bunker and just go and do things. Yeah. It's just very, very well protected. It's quite an interesting first activation.
I must admit, sort of my deployment as a Morticians player, the first half of that is where do I want Casket? Where are Dirge and Memory going next to him? Yeah. Because they're the only ones that aren't impacted by it at all. And then I'm going to deploy the rest of my team. So I guess now I can just put them wherever I want.
Absolutely.
That's nice. Thanks.
I think that was a common Morticians deployment strategy. Was if I'm playing Casket, Memory and the Bird will be right near him because they're the only mod. Yeah, exactly.
And occasionally Brain Pan as well. Brain Pan's just like you can just see him just going like, I'll be this Brain Pan, go and stand over there. The smelly one again.
It's all right. Brain Pan doesn't have a nose, so Cosset we've already talked about. So Gast. Gast is really interesting because he's not been. I'll be fully. He's not been in my 10 for quite some time.
That makes me very sad.
Well, I have to play with Casket. He's in my 6 nearly every time. Because of the hideously long, drawn-out, denial-based MPE manner in which I play Guild Ball. Thank you for taking that away from me in Season 4. Casket goes down as a VP accelerant, so I can't have 2 1-influence models in my 6. And if I'm always playing Casket, there's no point in putting down Gast. That's changed now, because just that simple change of going from a 1-3 to a 2-3 influence makes him so much more viable.
Do we talk about how this happened?
I mean, I'm going to start off with an anecdote. Season 3 anecdote. And just for one, I'm going to disagree with you on something about Season 3, which is that Gast and Casket couldn't be played together. And this is unfortunately, as we're talking about this, it's already a completely invalidated argument, but I'm going to have it anyway.
Okay. which is
petty. No, not at all. Not at all. Right. Me and Timmy, who were the two guys that finished very highly with Morticians at WTC, both played with Gast and Casket in our 6 in the majority of our games. I did it for 3 of the tournament games out of 5, and I think you did it for about the same. I would strongly disagree that that's not possible. A couple months ago, would have actually agreed with you. I actually had my opinion changed quite recently on this. Tried it a couple of times and was like, yeah, okay, I can definitely see it now. And then it became my standard 6 into most situations. Anyway, sorry, not to go off on a rant. Gast, for the longest time, it was totally. It was a Perkins rant. It's a very, very tame. Gast, for the longest time, has actually been my favourite model in Guild Ball. Yeah. Actually, there's another small anecdote that's going to come out with. Sherwin once asked me, if Sherwin ever asks you what your favourite model is, don't tell him. Because when I did that, Gast died in the fluff a few weeks later. And I was very, very upset. and even though he would completely deny that is what happened, that is, in my head, is exactly what happened. The training events was, I told him what my favourite model was, and it got killed straight away. Anyway, so... You
showed weakness.
I showed compassion. That was obviously a mistake.
Hey, look,
that's not something
he's still in the fluff. He's in the season 3 fluff. He just happens to be a ghost.
and that very, very lovely piece of... And that very lovely piece of fan artwork we saw recently as well, by the way. Dan White's, which was lovely. But yeah, so Gast has always been he's always been a model that's fascinated me and been very interesting. And I thought he was one of the models that I really loved from learning Guild Ball in the earliest days, because you can quite clearly see how he is a tank. He's a resilient model, but you look at him and he has none of the usual traits of being a resilient model, with the exception of having quite a good counter attack. He's a defense 3 and arm 1, fairly typical, got a high number of boxes, but then you go to the back of his card and go, all right, what's making him hard to kill? There is technically nothing here that's making him difficult to kill at all. He's just got his 21 boxes and he's got his 3-1, and as soon as you go through that, he's taken out. What he does do, though, is he does it in a very, very Mortician-y way, which is he makes you think about going into attacking quite a lot because of fear and rising anger. Fear being that you have to spend an additional influence to attack him, and rising anger that the first time you damage him, you get the Mortician player gets 2 momentum points. And those two things together just make it a real pain to come in to hit him, because technically, I guess fear does protect him from being taken out in one go, because it means that a 6 influence captain can't usually spend 6 influence worth of attacks on Gast. They're only ever going to spend 5 because that first one is fear. So technically that makes him a little bit more difficult to kill in one activation. But statistically, it takes the same number of actual attacks to bring him down as I don't know, anybody else that doesn't have tough hide, I guess. I don't really know where I was going at that point. I just started and didn't really have a conclusion.
I must admit, I've always found fear more useful against strikers, just messing with their maths. And so it's going to be interesting to see him back in my lineup to do that. Equally, Rising Anger was mainly utilised by me against engineers and alchemists, people that want to play the long range game, because at least then I'm still generating momentum.
Yep, certainly. And I really enjoy throwing Gast in people's faces, going, he's not that difficult to kill. I can take him down. I don't want to hit him with anybody, though. Nobody ever wants to be. It's like I don't know. This
hold me back.
Yeah, well, it's nobody wants to. It's a bar fight where nobody wants to be the first person to throw the first punch, because they know they're going to be the person that also takes the retaliation first as well. It's that nobody wants to be that first person to hit Gast. So often nobody will hit Gast, which is just great for the Mortician player, because you've just got this dude striding through the melee, knocking people down, being completely unhindered. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
So
you can go on. Sorry.
No. So with the influence, is this a conscious approach across the board for like the traditional 1-3 big guy to move to being having more influence? Or is that something you can't really answer at this stage because we haven't seen every guild announce?
Yes, it's fine. Yes, we'll answer the question, and yes, it is. As much as we'd like to have as much unique identity to as many models as possible, and we do play around with influence stats still to a degree, we know that we should play around with influence stats less than we did in the beginning. I mean, in like season 1 of Guild Ball, there were all kinds of weird influence stats. Obviously, Obulus had his 5/8. I mean, I think normal Graves only generated 1 and Silence generated 3, and there was all kinds of weird things. And we've slowly more standardized that. And we still have some teams that have specifically weird influence stats. So Blacksmiths as a guild. Right. There are other models as well, Cosset, and other models with Fury, etc. There are other reasons for us to manipulate influence stats. But we are, in our development now, we are consciously saying that if a model has an odd influence stat, has a non-standard influence stat, the standard influence stat being either 2-4 for a normal player or 4-6 for a captain, if they don't have that standard influence stat, they have to have a reason why that is the case. Yeah. And for Gast, he doesn't really... He's a really good model. He has a really good playbook. He has a 2-inch man of his own. He has all that decent resource-based defensive tech, and the unmasking is very good. There's a lot of really good parts about his model, but he doesn't really have a specific reason to only generate one influence point. So we brought him up to 2. It's actually something that me and Steve actually disagreed with our playtesters on. Because we are big fans of Gast. We love Gast. We've always been. Gast, as you mentioned, is in my starting 6 most of the time in most games. I already like playing with him. But
the same.
What we found from our playtest groups is that every single playtest group that was playing with Morticians was feeding back was going, Gast needs to have this extra influence point to be taken in the 6 of most people. And there's a principle when developing about how and when and where and how much trust or whatever, not all that stuff was not relevant, whatever, how much trust and faith you put in your playtesters and how much control you allow them to have over making changes. And generally, where you draw that line is very important for how much of a control a developer has over their own game. That said, when you don't allow your playtest groups to speak to each other, which we don't, all of our playtest groups are discouraged from speaking to each other so that they don't contaminate feedback. Obviously, you start getting groupthink and other things like that as well. And we want them to come to their own decisions individually, but using the same. If they all come to at the end of the day, if they all come to the same conclusion, using the same collection of evidence, but without having spoken to each other, then that's quite a powerful piece of feedback. And it's at times like that when you have to go as a developer. Okay, it's possible in this situation that I'm incorrect and my playtesters are right, especially if they've all come, and it sounds like a very arrogant thing to say, I guess, but I'm quite a big believer that as a developer, you have to have a very deep and firm knowledge base of the game, and you have to have the confidence in your own knowledge base of the game to use that and make decisions off your own back. And on occasion, you're allowed to disagree with your playtesters and say that they're wrong. But when all of them are coming back and going, this is what we think it should be and this is why, and they haven't spoken to each other to come to that conclusion, you're probably going, I might be wrong in this instance. Okay, fine. So we weren't sure about it at first, being completely honest, but we've been convinced about it over time, and I'm sure it'll be fine. So, yeah.
Cool. Graves, in many ways, we've already spoken about. Of course, not having tooled up anymore is going to be difficult, a change for people to have. It's not going to get old. It's not going to get old. When are the losing guilds from Union and Chains getting their tooled up model? I think he's reasonably comfortable skipping over Graves. He does exactly what he did in the past, and will continue to do so. He will just be challenged for his spot considerably more than he ever has done before.
Yes.
To the point where there was a sort of sitting there working out my prospective 12. I did look down at the sheet one day and go, Graves isn't on it. He's not even in my roster.
Yep.
And I'm curious. That has changed because I had a bit of a panic and nosebleed. But but he's going to see less play, so I don't think we need to spend a great deal of time there. People know what he does. So veteran Hemlock is an interesting one to see changes so early. I imagine she's still quite different from where she was originally in terms of playtesting, but the playbook's the same, her stat line is the same. It's really the inclusion of smelling salts that's changed. Is this purely to bring in condition removal into guild?
I mean, yes. So veteran Hemlock's been affected by 2. Veteran Hemlock didn't need changes. We're happy with the model, but
she's amazing. Yeah,
but she got affected by 2 global changes. One being that blind. We want to reduce the range of blind from 8 to 6, and that wasn't something we wanted to do because of veteran Hemlock. It's something we want to do because of the impact of blind as a character play on the game. And we talked about as well about reducing the capacity for teams to stay at a distance from each other and not engage. Blind being reduced from 8 to 6 is definitely part of that. The other thing as well is it's not necessarily veteran Hemlock gaining smelling salts as the Morticians gaining access to condition tech, and it's something that we have done across the board in season 4. Is that I'm pretty sure every single major guild, and I'm pretty sure most of the minor guilds, have some form of dedicated condition tech, whether that is smelling salts or brand new abilities or whatever, and that is to combat the rise. Or there has been a rise in condition play in the game in general, and spoilers. The alchemist, exactly. The alchemist put out kick out a dramatically increased amount of conditions to what they did in season 3. But in general, we've seen more condition play being used, as we mentioned before on the blogs. So obviously we've shown off a lot of more range knockdown models. So we've decided to level the playing field by making sure that everybody at least has the option of bringing some form of condition check if they want to. And Hemlock just seemed like the most appropriate place to do that in the guild, really, especially since she had it on her non-veteran form.
Prime card. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yep.
You broke up a little bit there, but I think we got the point of what you're saying. Also, I can't tell if it's the line breaking up or if it's your programming glitching.
Maybe
Pelage,
both.
a little bit of both. Pelage, not an enormous change. Principally, it's really only the changing of from I can't remember really what it's called now. Now it's empathy rather than what was it called?
Dark Allure.
Dark Allure. Any reason for the changing in wording?
Yeah, Windle has it. So this is a change on the farmers, I guess, that's impacted Pelage, is that they both now have the exact same ability. So I think the version that Windle had of this in season 3 was that he would have the same ability where you can't generate momentum off playbook damage results, but it would only trigger on a certain point in his health. That's not the case anymore. He just has that for the entire time, like Pelage does, which means they have the same ability. So we needed to change the name of the ability so that it fit properly on both models. And the name we came to is Empathy. So there's no playstyle, there's no gameplay change there for Pelage. It's just a name change for the ability. The only other thing I think that happened on a card is that we changed Cloak of Rats from being an aura to a pulse. That mechanically doesn't actually change how that works. It's just it always acted like a pulse, but we called it an aura for some reason. Yeah. So yeah, but there's actually there's no other that I'm aware of anyway. Please don't tell me there's something that's come up. No, there's no. I'm pretty sure there's no other gameplay changes to Pelage. It's just those two bits.
I'm just furiously checking the release schedule to when the farmers stuff comes out, and it will be as of release of this yesterday. So good. We've not just massively given the game away for Windle.
And we obviously knew that beforehand, Rich.
Yes. To be honest, the amount of times I have checked the list of when these blogs or podcasts or YouTube videos are going out, and we have been coincidentally the right side. It's been beautiful. But please stop it. You're killing me, gibbling. So yeah, I don't think there's really any massive need to change anything on or go over anything on Pelage. She's a new model. She's been a very welcome model in my rosters, particularly against butchers and against fish. And she's very I look forward to using her some more, particularly as the damage she puts out is lovely. Now, silence is an interesting one for me. As you well know, maybe, came to Guild Ball reasonably late, came in about halfway through the last season. So I've never experienced Silence when he brought 3 influence to the team, when he was this sort of, the vice captain that the fluff makes him out to be. It's fair to say, I think, that Silence dropped off a bit during season 3 in terms of how often he was put on the pitch. Do you think that's fair to say in terms of pick rate?
Steve?
I completely agree. There's certain matchups where I think he was very good, but I think one of the main problems that a lot of people have with him is the one-die character plays and the riskiness that those plays bring. Is when I play him, I want to either have momentum or generate momentum during his activation to use those plays, because there's nothing worse than Silence goes first. You think, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to
going last.
Yeah, it's going to be like this model that's knocked down has no influence is going to be going first, and that model over there that I will take time and deal with is going to be going last. I'll roll the dice. Oh, I got a 1. Well, I mean, I'm glad I got lots of value out of this activation, your activation.
Yeah.
And
we've all done it.
Yeah, exactly. And it was one of those where we wanted to give that option for him to use those plays, but we wanted to make sure that it wasn't oppressive, because that during the playtest there was a point where Tenacity, his new rule, which allows him to choose the cost of his character plays, was up to 3 or 4.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and that got very quickly changed after a playtest game where I spent 3, I think, on shutout. On tucked on Thresher every single game against every single turn against Bryce, and yeah, that was probably not okay. So it got changed.
Once Bryce stopped crying, then we had to sit down and had a reasonable conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, we laughed while he was crying.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're Mortician players. It's what we do,
Yeah.
I'm glad you said shut out there and not tucked, because everyone knows tucked goes on fallow, because that's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's one of those. The only way I can really describe it is that this isn't one of the models we play tested at the playtest event. So this was when I got these cards through. This was one that was brand new to me, and I can reenact the exact moment when I read Tenacity, because I made this noise. And I think that's the best, because immediately you can see the response to it. Also for Fire Blast, I think a lot of people are going to talk about shutout and tucked on this, but a cheeky one influence Fire Blast to block charge lanes is much more efficient, and you can almost because Tenacity isn't once per turn, you can almost redistribute how you've distributed influence for silence, if that makes sense.
Yep. I mean, if you wanted to, you could walk into melee, you could make an attack, do Momentous 2 damage, get some momentum, throw shutout, throw tucked, and then the cheeky 1-die Fire Blast. As we've been calling it.
The cheeky 1-die Fire Blast. Equally, again, we're seeing another model with an AoE being triggered from the playbook, which I can't stress enough how good that is. Silence's playbook has always been, for me, like the stealth finisher. Having a Momentous 2-on-2 and a reasonably good speed in a charge of 7 inches has gotten me more takeouts than his card would insinuate you would. But now being able to trigger that Fire Blast on 3, I think is going to see some use and is not to be sniffed at. So it's a very welcome return to Silence into my roster, which I'm now really glad is 12.
I think the times that I've played him, the amount of times when he makes an attack and you've got 2 successors, and then you go Momentous 2, and people go, he has Momentous 2-on-2, because they just don't. Exactly. They just don't expect it. Then the other thing, while we're talking about his playbook, his tackle did come down as well, because his tackle was, I think, on 5. And I think it was a case of we weren't really sure why it was there. It was obviously put there for a reason a long time ago, and we just...
It was put there for Season 1 reasons, and Season 1 reasons can be anything, really. They're a bit nebulous. I mean, I'm surprised that hasn't been a meme yet, but that's because maybe people don't talk about it much. But when something has been there since Season 1, it hasn't changed and no one really knows why. You just say Season 1 things. It might even be better to have that meme that's that dude with crazy hair and he's got the hands up. It's just like Season 1.
Aliens.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
But yeah. So I mean, it's especially weird because Silence is one of the only models in the Morticians that you kind of want interacting with the ball a lot, because he's got a decent kickstart already, and then he's got kick support Dirge, so he can actually have a 4-die kick.
I must admit, I was surprised to see kick support make it to Season 4 in the kind of the ethos of making things simple, making things a bit more streamlined, then still having that sort of positional requirement. Because, of course, Creation's gone and things like that. So his relationship with Dirge is lessened in many ways, but he's still got access to the 4-7 kick, which, whilst we're talking 4-7 kicks, it seems a reasonable thing to say. Tap-in rules, is that rounding down?
It is, yes. So he will only get tap in it's the same for Football Legend as well, but you'll be rounded down. So if you're kicking with an odd number of an odd valued range, then it will be the lesser of the two. So if you're kicking 7 inches, you get tap in 3 inches, basically.
That makes sense. So yes, very much looking forward to having Silence back on the pitch. Skulk is an interesting one, as I think his playbook is the playbooks that's changed the most in Guild.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So this sounds like there's a story behind that.
There is a bit of one, which is that the amount of proofing that we got to do on a lot of these cards was not necessarily as much as we would like.
Okay.
There were some results on Skulk's cards that were meant to be unchanged, and they ended up being changed on the final card. But that's what's gone to the public. At the end of the day, we assessed it afterwards and went, there's some unintended changes to that card there. Just to point them out, the knockdown coming down from 6 to 4 was intended.
Sorry, say again.
Yeah, so the knockdown coming down from 6 to 4, that is intended. The tackle double dodge going momentous, that was not intended. And the double dodge single push going to a double push single dodge was not intended either. But we honestly, proving 170 cards in as short time space as we did, and then some of them going out to public, occasionally small errors arise. Those two extra ones I mentioned at the end were not actually meant to happen. But we analysed it afterwards and went, do we want to go in errata this card now we've shown it to the public, or is it probably fine as it is? So we looked at the model and went, no, it's actually fine. Just leave it. It's okay.
And now the dodge double push sort of aligns in with Piper.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Is it's theme. It's making him like Piper. Theme within the team.
So I'm glad Steve's here to correct me on PR stance. Yes, we meant to do that. That's something we.
It was to mirror Piper's. It was to mirror Piper's results to make the team more consistent and more thematic across the board.
Let's go with that. I'll edit this. So I'm not going to edit it. I'm going to leave that in. But yeah, seeing the tackle double dodge makes me very happy. Equally, I'm a big fan of Skulk. He's generally the fourth man in my team, just because he's either a phenomenal battery, a great crowd out, probably the most survivable Mortician squaddy outside of Casket in my mind, because poised and double disengage on 2 is a lovely combination. But lovely to see him sort of retain those sort of unique traits and to gain the lower knockdown, which I must admit is a very, very welcome thing to see.
Yep. Go on, Steve.
He's also just annoying for opponents. I didn't realize how annoying he was for my opponents until I was playing Engineers into him playing Pin Vice, and I was just like, this model is really annoying, and I now realize what I'm doing to people. I'm gonna keep doing it though because Morticians, and I'm a bad person. But he is just annoying.
I mean, I had a fantastic game against a local opponent recently. He's playing Order. Kicked off with Mist, and the Mist goal is very much on the cards. And I ran Skulk forward, retrieved the ball, and just kept sprinting forwards towards him as close as possible. Put up Horrific Odor, put up Pest Control, and he stared very confused at the pitch, realizing A, he couldn't charge Skulk and bounce off far enough to get to my goal because I brought the ball too near him. B, that his influence allocation was not going to be able to get around both Horrific Odor and Pest Control and all those sorts of things, and sort of very audibly said, well, at least you've killed the ball on Skulk for the turn, I don't have to worry about that, and sort of didn't activate Mist for the first time, going to win about his game. And then the ability that everyone forgets about, activate Brain Pan and use I'm Open to pull the ball back into your line. And I think Brain Pan having I'm Open is one that people just forget again and again and again and again, and works lovely with that ability of Skulk to just deny people the ball. No fun for you. It's all mine. Nom, 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 nom. So is there anything...
No, Rich. That's bad. Sorry, go on.
That's something you have to worry about, not me.
True.
No. So that's sort of all the Morticians cards. Is there anything, before we sort of divulge into the remaining Ratcatchers, is there anything you wanted to cover in terms of the Morticians design ethos, or have we covered everything?
I mean, from my mind, we've covered everything, and I kind of dove into the deep stuff when we started talking about Outburst really early on. Really, and the control play style is one that is a bit nebulous at times, and it's hard to define, and therefore it can be a challenge to develop. But I think it's quite useful actually that a lot of the developers here at Steve Void, or I say a lot of them, me and Steve, and there's a number of other staff here that we all love playing with Morticians. We play with them a lot, so they're one of the ones that are a bit, even though they are in theory quite difficult to develop, we've got a lot of experience in the building with them, like first-hand experience, which certainly helps a lot with them. So I'm really excited to see what people make of them in season 4. And on the one hand, the snowflake in me is like, I like being one of the only Mortician players around, but I also know that it's really, really good for everyone to play all of the guilds equally. So I'm excited to see more people playing with the Morticians and having fun with them, basically.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's...
Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think Scalpel is really going to help with that. The number of people that have never shown interest in Morticians and all of a sudden like, yeah, I think I might play Morticians, and that for us as developers is such a good thing to hear, because that is one of the rewarding parts of the job.
And also existing players.
Yeah, for sure.
Also existing players that were like, Jamie, I was thinking about playing another team in season 4, but then you showed us Scalpel.
And it's interesting because I don't think, because I used Scalpel quite a lot in when I was using Morticians. I generally used to put her in against Hunters, against Falconers, against Fish, against Masons, and against Blacksmiths, which is a reasonable proportion of the guilds out there. Either because Falconers and Hunters tend to ruin Obulus's day quite happily because they ignore all of his defenses. Masons and Blacksmiths' armor is negated by anatomical precision, and with Fish, she can get to any of them quite happily. And admittedly, that's my logic, and I'm not asking for validation of that logic. But I don't see that the drops where I use Scalpel changes all that much here. It's just that she becomes more viable into situations where I might not necessarily have used her before.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. One matchup I think she has gained that is she loves playing into someone like Vet Rage, because Vet Rage is not happy about his scrum getting reformed to
100%.
affect Bloody Coin and things like that.
Equally, therefore, Brewers, because of their sort of scrum dictation.
Farmers as well, and Blacksmith. Basically, anyone that has some very strict positioning is not happy into Scalpel.
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is she's very good into footballing teams because she can get to them and ruin their day or change their positioning, especially with moving velocity or flint or a turret or angel or something like that. Just a little bit outside of their kick range is hilarious. So you can use Scalpel anywhere now, which is amazing to see. And I stand by my earlier prediction that someone is going to use Scalpel and burn the world, and it's going to be hilarious. Right. You winding up for something there, Perk?
No, it's good. I was thinking about it, but I'm not gonna
bother. All right, fine. Piper then. So a relatively new captain, and one that's seen a fair, reasonable amount of changes, I think, in this pass, both to the cost of his abilities and in his kick results. So where are we with Piper, Jamie?
So a lot of the stuff, as we said in the Ratcatcher blog, really is we wanted to modify the actual Ratcatcher game plan to being, or I'm trying to think about perception. So what we wanted the playstyle to be, intention if you want to, versus what people were actually playing with. And what we wanted it to be is that people were still scoring 2 to 3 goals a game. And if they were ever stuck into a corner, you've got some decent backup melee damage in the form of Pelage and Scourge and Veteran Graves as well, to get a couple of takeouts. Or if they're really in a corner, they could use Snack Digger to get a 4 victory point takeout.
Yeah.
What was actually happening is that people were using that as a main offensive strategy, is to go for the Snack Digger takeouts multiple times per game and then maybe score a goal at the end to finish it off. And this is not what we wanted the Ratcatchers to do or to play like at all. So we did have to go and have a decent look at how we could rectify that, basically, and how to take them back to what we wanted them to do. Because sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's okay that models are used in a way that we didn't expect. But when it's a whole guild that their entire play style is off, that's not okay. Certainly the majority of people that were playing with them, it was not working terribly well. So we did a couple of things to bring back into line their capacity for melee takeouts. So that is not, in fact, that statement's not even true. They still have the same capacity to take out models that they had before. If anything, it's probably got a little bit better because of Veteran Graves. But they're not doing the gimmicky takeouts that are worth 4 victory points. Each takeout they get is worth 2 VPs, which means they should now be a bit more reliant upon their goal scoring. At the same time, we've increased their capacity to goal score by making Bonesaw a heck of a lot better than he was. We've given extra kick dice to Skulk and to Piper, and those are the main aspects to it, I guess, really. Is obviously, as well as making Veteran Graves' football game a little bit better as well. And hopefully now we can see a readjustment of their playstyle to be more heavily focused on goal scoring, so that we can see that either scoring 3 goals to win or scoring 2 goals and getting 2 takeouts. And hopefully that's what we're going to see from them in the future. Also did a couple of other small bits to them. Obviously, you've seen the change to miasma on which directly impacts on disease. And even though the changes to salve and how they interact with disease don't necessarily directly impact their play style in terms of how many goals we want them to score, that's just a little way of making playing with the Ratcatchers a little bit easier. And I guess that kind of falls under the complexity headline, subtitle, whichever. Playing with disease is a little bit simpler now, because if you have a knockdown diseased Scourge, you don't have to worry about removing all the conditions because you want him diseased. You can just take out the knockdown and have him go in wreck face like he always was gonna. And hopefully they're a little bit easy to play with. So if we was to summarize what we've done with the Ratcatchers in 2 points, it's realign the playstyle to be more goal scoring focused and make them a little bit easier to use.
It's so Pay the Piper going from 2 influence to 1.
Yeah.
Is that just really to sort of increase the threat of Pay the Piper?
It's to see it being used more often, really, because Pay the Piper is actually a very strong ability. And
that's amazing.
The times at which I would see it being used is when people happen to spike high enough to roll. I think he had a momentous playbook trigger on 5, or still has that. Sorry, I think he's got a momentous playbook trigger for it on 5. Or at least he had it in season 3, and I would only really see it being used then because the opponent had spent 1 influence on triggering it, and they're going to get a momentum for it. So people wanted to use the ability, but they didn't feel like paying a 2 influence cost was worth it, which means the ability is overcosted, quite simply. So we had a look at bringing the cost of the ability down, and that seems to have fixed the problem. Is that people are now happier to trigger off the playbook or just spend the 1 influence for it, because it's really, really good to have up all the time for that cost, basically. So
it's interesting because, of course, and I was quite vocal about it around Vengeance, losing in my final round to a beautifully played Rat Trap by my opponent. That sort of play style of I'm going to use Piper as a taxi to bring opponents' models into a scrum, ostensibly is still there. The double push on 2, the heroics the same, haunting melody is the same. It's still absolutely. It's just the gimmicky 4VP or the 3VP, as Greg Day utilised very, very well to win Big Bad Beer Ball Bash a few weeks ago. Well done, Greg. Your playstyle hasn't really changed. It's just the gimmicks being taken out of it. So it's nice to see that Piper is getting benefits as well in terms of the extra dice for his kick. 4/6 is incredibly reliable unless you're Scather in season 3. Thank you for missing all those tap-ins. But elsewhere in the guild, Squeak's only real change is that he's got slightly faster. Unless I'm massively missing something.
Yeah, no, he just got the 1-1 move. But remember, he's also going to get impacted by that change to Veteran Graves. So if you're taking him with Squeak together, you're going to get to use Squeak a lot more actively, and we're interested to see how that comes off. I think that when people are getting more use out of him and using things like Dreadful Shriek a little bit more often, then people will see how that goes. Basically, the prediction is that people will be a bit happier with him being able to engage a little bit more easily. Remembering he's also still got tag along as well, so he's actually quite quick. He can move 10 inches a turn.
100%,
influence. And then if you don't allocate him at the start as well, give him the 2 from Veteran Graves, go and do a Dreadful Shriek and maybe make an attack and do some Momentous Nibbles. Really good.
I think the other thing that Squeak I see him being used a lot for is the surprise goal threat. And the number of people that at events will come up and tell me stories of when they were, backed into a corner, they were about to lose, and Squeak gets reveried and scores a goal to win the game.
Amazing. Amazing.
And it's something I hear a lot about because a lot of people just ignore him. They see that he has no influence. He's a mascot. What's he going to do? And then he's used to get that final goal. And it's something that I just enjoy hearing about because who doesn't want a rat that scores goals?
Your opponent. So Miasma main, as you mentioned there, Jamie, like main changes the change to salve, which got, certainly locally from my community, got an incredibly positive response. That disease. One of the sort of the commentary that I had from my local players was that disease doesn't, outside of Scourge, doesn't really have a benefit to the Ratcatchers when maybe it should, or at least they felt it should. So being able to remove another condition if you are diseased is a really nice change, especially then as it doesn't put any kind of activation order control in, that it doesn't have any requirements outside of positioning. So that's a nice, elegant change, if I may say so, sirs.
It's also might make you think about as well in certain situations, like I'm playing against the Brewers, I'm going to spend most of the game with a lot of my players knocked down. Then in certain games, you might even decide I actually want to have a lot of my players diseased because of how salve is going to benefit me in future turns.
It's also like, I don't know the answer to this question, so because I've not seen outside of the blogs the season 4 rulebooks themselves. So in terms of auras and how that interacts with terrain, particularly, and line of sight, is auras going to, because this is certainly an area that I've always had as a bit of area of confusion amongst my community, is how does line of sight and an aura interact with one another? Do you need to have line of sight to the origin model, or is just being within 6 inches sufficient?
No, the only time you are required to have line of sight to something in Guild Ball, please correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, is when you use the word target. So that's why we sometimes use the word choose. Choose is just pick a model that's not using the keyword target. The keyword target says you must be within range and line of sight of whatever model. So I don't know, if an ability just says, like a Deadbolt, for instance, I guess says target enemy model, suffers 3 damage, the 2-inch push and the knockdown condition. You know that has an 8-inch range because it has the range of the character play, and it says target enemy model. So you're saying it is within 8 inches because that's the established range of the character play, and I have line of sight to the opponent. So any other ability that doesn't say target doesn't require line of sight, whether it says choose or if it doesn't say anything at all, doesn't need line of sight. So auras and pulses don't need line of sight.
You've done your trick again of mentioning another guild, and it's one that's already been released. So yeah,
we're good
it again.
I mean, the thing is, I was remembering it based off season 3 anyway, and just like, yeah, no, it didn't change, so it's fine. We're off. I told you, mate, we're gonna wing it. It's good.
Lastly, then, really, because we've sort of been through all the other changes. Lastly, Scourge. His ability to heal 14 wounds a turn is quite something. I think it's fair to say. It is. So is that really where you see him now? Is just being this incredible self-healing tank?
Yeah, I mean, he hits real hard still, and he hasn't got the most number of health boxes to bring him down, but you can use him in quite clever ways to make him quite resilient. The counter attack to snack break is underrated, and when you're trying to take him out, that can be incredibly infuriating because it's you getting 4 health back that you then have to take off him again through tough hide.
Yeah, like your brain goes to you, oh, that'll be momentous 2, your counter attack, sweet, I heal 6. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I do like the imagery of him counter-attacking. Like someone's attacking him, and his response is, "No, I'm just gonna eat something. It's all good."
Yeah, like he's leaning back to take this massive haymaker, and the opponent just like, "Oh my god," and just cowers. And then when they're like, "Why didn't I get hit?" and they're looking up from where they've been cowering, and he's just halfway through munching on a rat or whatever. And he's just like, "Yeah, I got bored. I didn't want to hit you."
I didn't want to make you feel bad. You carry on. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
You do you, mate. You do you.
So, I mean, rats were our first minor guild. So this seems like a reasonable place to ask you guys, how are minor guilds going into season 4? Are you happy with their implementation? Like, obviously, we've seen changes to the playstyle of Ratcatchers, and you're unafraid to make those changes where the minor guilds haven't been. It's very interesting, Steve, to note here that you're putting in rules to make me lose and Jamie's putting in rules to make me win. So that's a nice balance amongst the development team that I appreciate. But yeah, are they doing what you envisaged? Are they where you wanted them to be?
You want to take this, Perkins?
It's a difficult one to answer that without going into loads of detail, and I waffle a lot, and I have waffled a lot. I'd say they've been successful. A lot of people are playing with A lot of people are interested in them. We don't see a ton of games being played competitively with the minor guilds yet, which is something that we do want to rectify. And I'm still curious, and to me the jury is still out on whether that's a perception thing, like just because the minor guilds do bring fewer models to the table, whether people just innately think that makes them less powerful. And I'm not sure that's the case. But ultimately, me believing this on my own isn't going to change the public perception of that being the case. So there are things that we have to do to encourage them to be played a little bit more in certain instances. And with the Ratcatchers changes to Season 4, the majority of what we've done isn't just to increase their power level. I think we've probably done that slightly. But the main thing we've done is to modify their playstyle to play in the fashion that we wanted them to play in originally, because we didn't achieve that first time round. That's our mistake. But ultimately, I think that they've been received quite well. We see a lot of excitement and drive about them, and they are getting players interested in the game that might not have otherwise been interested before. And it is certainly another thing that allows us to keep going with our ethos of we're going to expand the game laterally rather than the game's width rather than the game's depth.
Yes, yeah.
So we're going to keep adding new guilds to the game rather than increasing like dramatic. We're probably going to keep adding models to the existing guilds as well, but we're going to do that less than we are add entire new guilds, and that seems to be something that gets people excited. So we reckon it's been a success, but that's something I think that a lot of people could spend a lot of time talking about and discussing and have differing opinions on. And it's been nice to see them being played in competitive events. We like to see them being played a little bit more in competitive events, but ultimately that's not the be all and end all. At the end of the day, as long as people are, and I don't want to get into like corporate speak here, but as long as people are buying the product, I guess, and playing with it and enjoying it in their own way, whether that's enjoying it in their own home, enjoying it in leagues, casually playing it in competitive tournaments, that means that people are enjoying the things that we're making, and that's good enough. But we still like to see them being played a lot more in general.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Jamie, that you and I talk a lot, which is fine. And we were discussing minor guilds a couple of months ago, and I just to highlight something you said in one of those conversations, because I think it's a very sort of pertinent to what you're saying there, is you were saying to me, where do you think of minor guilds? Like, where are you? Are they in your, as someone who probably reasonably well known for changing guilds quite a lot, I maintain that this is media research rather than an inability to make a considered opinion or decision rather. Where are you on minor guilds? Are they in your rotation? And I sort of said, to be honest, not just yet. I've used them a couple of times. Falconers against you and Ratcatchers every now and again, and to which your response was, I'll get you with one of them yet. And I like that. I like that idea that, the idea that I haven't put minor guilds down on the table a lot is something that you want to change, not just for me personally, because believe it or not, it isn't all about me, but for people as a whole, that's to see minor guilds have a major uptake, for want of a better expression. So, just is any?
Certainly. No, I was just going to say certainly, and I was actually just thinking like this is something I talked about quite a lot at the recent weekend at WTCX, interesting conversation with people, and it's important, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it is important to us to get people playing as many different guilds as possible, and it's something that I've mentioned to you in our private conversation before, is that it's our job to make your decision on what guild to play as difficult as possible.
Yeah.
So it's something that we joke about, but it genuinely is a thing that if you have an easy choice to play one guild, great, that's great. That means we already have you as a fan of the game, and that's utterly fantastic. If we can have somebody as a fan of 3 or 4 guilds and they don't know what guild to play, that's an even better spot, because that means they probably love the game and there's so much that excites them about it. And if we can get to the golden territory to get to is if we can get to a point where every guild that someone chooses to play, and even within that guild, every model that you choose to play with, if you are picking all of that stuff based on personal preference and not this is better, then we've succeeded and we've made the perfect game. We're never going to get to that exact point because there's so much stuff that's subjective and people have differing opinions, and that's all.
No, but it's a noble aspiration.
But absolutely, you've got to strive to perfection in the hopes of getting anywhere near it. So if we can make more of those choices harder for people that they don't know what to play with, and if those choices when they are made are personal preference of I like all this stuff, but at the end of the day I'm just going to play with this because I can't really describe it. I just want to play with this more. It looks cool or something like that. Then perfect. And that's what the aim in general is. So
Perfect. So,
and I think the other thing with minor guilds as well, to go back to them, is we like rats are our first minor guild, and I think we're getting, as with everything, we're getting better at making them. Like we learn lessons. Like every model we make and every guild we make, we learn new lessons and get better at doing what we do. So hopefully, as time goes on, we'll make more and more appealing minor guilds. And, if we can't get them played, we'll make tweaks to get them played, I guess.
Perfect. Gents, any closing thoughts, therefore, as we sort of begin to wrap this up, on either the changes to Morticians and Ratcatchers? Any sort of final things you wish to leave handy listeners or handy viewers with?
If you're interested in playing either Morticians or the Ratcatchers, I mean, there's still going to be a number of metal teams for the Morticians and shops. Go and pick them up. Pick up the Ratcatchers from your local gaming store. Pick up the Ratcatchers or the resin Morticians from the Steamforge gaming store. Make sure, if you're interested in this guild, give it a try in season 4. See what you think. Play more Guild Ball.
Nice. And it's interesting because I've always said, Morticians are a team that I am deeply attracted to, both in terms of aesthetic and also in terms of play style, but I'm always shied away from playing them in tournament competition because I think they'd be exhausting, or I think they'd be very demanding, or I'm frankly not good enough to use them. But as anyone that knows me knows, I have recorded, not just on film, but on paper and in spreadsheets, every single game of Guild Ball I've ever played, because I'm an enormous nerd. And going back and looking through all of those statistics, as I want to do, my win rate is no different with this team than it is with any other team. So just because they're complicated, just because they have a divergent play style that is not as straightforward as others, don't let that put you off playing them. They're a phenomenal guild to use. And if you are put off by the perceived skill flaw required to play them, don't be. If nothing else, Jamie's given you a flowchart from his daughter on how to allocate influence and do your activations. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me and going through all the changes for both Ratcatchers and Morticians. There will be more to come, I'm sure, within this playlist. The ridiculous amount of content that we're putting around Morticians. Please do take a look at that, and also please do take a look at all the other work being put out by everyone else. Thank you very much, folks.